The mind cannot be seen. So where is it? Buddhist wisdom. What is the mind? We use the word constantly. I think. I feel. I remember. I'm afraid. Behind every one of these sentences is an assumption that there is something doing the thinking, something doing the feeling. Or, perhaps more honestly, is it a something at all? Try to find it. Close your eyes if you want. Look inward. Where is the mind? Is it behind your eyes? Inside your skull? Somewhere in your chest? You have spent your entire life experiencing the world through it, suffering and rejoicing through it. Something so intimate, so constant, and yet impossible to place. And here is what makes this more than a philosophical puzzle. This process you cannot locate is not neutral. It shapes how you see every person you meet, how you interpret every word spoken to you, how you respond to silence, how you react to loss. It shapes, often before you are even aware of it, whether a situation feels threatening or safe, whether a memory brings warmth or pain, whether a stranger calls forth trust or suspicion. And if you try to observe it, observe your mind, a deeper question appears immediately. Observe with what? You are using the mind itself to search for the mind. The eye is trying to see itself. The instrument is trying to measure the instrument. If you sit with this question honestly, without rushing to an answer, you may notice something uncomfortable. Every answer you come up with is itself a product of the mind. Concepts can clarify many things. But if you are looking for the mind as an object you can finally grasp, concepts keep arriving one step too late. And this is where the question begins to change. At first, it sounds as if we are asking for the location of the mind, as if the mind were a hidden object somewhere inside us, waiting to be found. But the longer you look, the more questionable that assumption becomes. Maybe the problem is not that the mind is too far away to see. Maybe the problem is that we have been looking for the wrong kind of thing. We look for something solid, something behind experience, something that owns the thoughts, holds the memories, carries the fear, and makes the decisions. But what if the mind is not that kind of thing at all? Before asking what the mind is, we need to clear away what we have mistaken it for. Most people walk through life carrying a picture of the mind that they have never examined. The danger is not that these pictures are unintelligent. The danger is that they are so familiar, we stop seeing them as pictures. The most common assumption today is that the mind is the brain. It makes sense on the surface. Neuroscience has shown deep correlations between mental activity and brain activity. When certain brain regions are damaged, certain mental capacities disappear. When neurochemistry changes, mood can change. So it is tempting to conclude that mind and brain are the same thing. The early Buddhist texts are not doing neuroscience. They are analyzing experience from another angle. How feeling, perception, intention, consciousness, and clinging arise. The Buddha described 5 aggregates through which we ordinarily construct the sense of a person: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. The brain, as a physical organ, belongs to the aggregate of form. But what we call mind includes aspects of feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. In the 𝐂𝐴𝐻𝐴 Sutta, the greater discourse on the destruction of craving, the Buddha explained that consciousness does not arise independently. Dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. Dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises, and so on. Consciousness is named according to the condition on which it arises. For the inquiry the Buddha was pursuing, the inquiry into suffering and freedom, reducing mind to a single organ would miss the structure of lived experience. The second assumption runs deeper, because it is so close to how most people experience being alive. There seems to be something inside this body that cannot be seen. You cannot point to it, cannot weigh it, cannot photograph it. And yet it seems to be the most important thing about you. There seems to be a knowing of being here, a continuity through growth, aging, changes of mood, belief, and circumstance. Everything around you changes, but this invisible presence inside seems to remain. And because it seems to remain, people naturally conclude, this must be my true self. This must be the soul. This picture provides comfort. If there is a permanent me inside, then death is less frightening, mistakes are less defining, and the chaos of experience has a fixed center. But it is exactly this kind of view that the Buddha challenged most directly. In the 𝐿 Sutta, a monk named Sati claimed that consciousness is a single unchanging entity that travels from life to life. The Buddha corrected him in the strongest terms. Consciousness arises dependent on conditions. There is no free-floating consciousness moving through bodies like a passenger switching trains. That feeling of a continuous, unchanging presence inside, from the Buddha's analysis, is something to be examined, not accepted as proof of a self. It may be understood as moments of experience arising so rapidly and seamlessly that they create the impression of something permanent, convincing, vivid, and yet without a fixed substance behind it. And in the 𝐿 Sutta, the discourse on sheaves of reeds, Venerable Sariputta gave a precise image for this dependence. Consciousness and name and form, the psychophysical structure of experience, are like two sheaves of reeds leaning against each other. Pull one away, and the other collapses. The body is not a machine commanded by the mind. The mind is not a ghost trapped inside the body. They stand only in dependence on each other. The third assumption is subtler, because it happens from inside experience itself. We believe that our thoughts and emotions are the mind. When anxiety arises, we say, "My mind is restless." When peace comes, we say, "My mind is calm." We identify the mind completely with whatever mental state happens to be present. But in the Pābhasara Sutta, the discourse on luminosity, the Buddha described mental defilements, greed, hatred, delusion, as agantuka, adventitious, contingent, conditioned, removable. Not permanent features of the mind. They arise under conditions, and under different conditions they can fade. The suttas also describe the mind as Pābhasara, luminous. This has led to much discussion over the centuries, and it is easy to misunderstand. It does not mean there is a pure, unchanging soul hiding beneath the noise of your thoughts. At minimum, it means that defilements are not permanent, unchangeable features of mental life. The mind can be trained, clarified, and released from their grip. This is a statement about transformation, not about an eternal true self. So if the mind is not simply the brain, not a soul, and not identical with your current thoughts and emotions, then how did the Buddha speak about it? The Buddha did not hand us a definition. He gave us something more useful, a description of how the mind operates. The first verses of the Dhammapada open with this: Mind precedes all mental states. Mind is their chief. They are all mind-wrought. If with an impure mind a person speaks or acts, suffering follows him like the wheel that follows the foot of the ox. If with a pure mind a person speaks or acts, happiness follows him like his never-departing shadow. In this context, the Pali word Dhamma is best understood as mental phenomena, experienced states, not as a claim that the mind creates the physical universe. This matters because many people hear mind precedes all things and conclude that the Buddha was saying reality itself is a mental creation. He was not. In the Sabha Sutta, the discourse on the all, the Buddha defined the all as the 6 sense bases and their objects: the eye and visible forms, the ear and sounds, the nose and odors, the tongue and flavors, the body and tactile sensations, the mind and mental phenomena. For the purpose of this teaching, outside this field of sense experience, we have no meaningful ground from which to speak. The Buddha was not teaching that the physical world is produced by personal thought. He was pointing to the totality of what we can know and experience through the meeting of senses and their objects. The world you live in is not a mental projection. It is a field of contact, and what the mind does within that field shapes whether you suffer or find freedom. Before you speak, before you act, a mental state has already gone ahead of you, and the quality of that state, whether colored by greed, confusion, and reactivity, or by clarity, generosity, and compassion, conditions what follows. The rain is the same. The contact is not experienced the same way. You may not control what happens, but the way experience is met, conditioned by attention, habit, intention, and understanding, is where suffering is either deepened or released. In the Asuttava Sutta, the discourse on the uninstructed, the Buddha said it would be more reasonable to regard the physical body as self than to regard the mind as self. The body at least lasts for decades, but what we call mind or consciousness arises and ceases continuously, day and night, one thing appearing, another vanishing, without pause. Think about what this means for your own experience. The mood you had this morning is gone. The thought that consumed you an hour ago has dissolved. The person you were at 15, with different fears, desires, and certainties, where did that mind go? The Buddha's point is sharp. What you call your mind was never one continuous substance. It was always a sequence, rapid, conditioned, each moment giving rise to the next, creating the appearance of something solid. But this does not mean the mind is nothing. In the 𝐂𝐴𝐻𝐸𝐺 Sutta, the Buddha rejected both extremes, the view that there is a permanent essence, and the opposite view that things fall into non-existence without dependent continuity. This is also why the Alagaddupama Sutta warns that even a correct teaching becomes dangerous when grasped wrongly, like a snake seized by the tail. There is continuity. There is cause and effect. There are habits, memories, tendencies, accumulated understanding. But this continuity is not carried by a fixed entity traveling through time. A habit is not a substance. It is a pattern being renewed. When the conditions change, the pattern changes. This is worth sitting with, because it cuts against something deep in how we experience ourselves. We feel continuous. We feel like the same person who went to sleep last night. And in a conventional sense, there is continuity. But the thread holding our experiences together is not made of something permanent. It is made of conditions giving rise to conditions, each moment inheriting tendencies from the previous moment, shaping the next, creating the appearance of a single unbroken self, the way a river appears continuous while its water never stays the same. And the mind does not stand apart from conditions. This is the larger point of dependent origination. Experience is not built from a mind on one side and a body on the other, as if one were the master and the other merely the servant. It is a web of conditions giving rise to further conditions. Within that web, avijja, not seeing clearly, is presented at the head of the chain. Not because the mind ranks higher than the body, but because blindness is where suffering begins to organize itself. You cannot stop the body from aging, falling ill, and dying. But you can change how the mind meets aging, illness, and death. The difference between meeting them with blind reactivity and meeting them with clear understanding, that is the terrain of the Buddha's training. If the mind has no fixed shape, no fixed location, no permanence, then what does it mean to see it? In the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the foundations of mindfulness, the Buddha taught cittanupassana, contemplating mind as mind. His instructions were remarkably specific. When greed is present, you know greed is present. When greed is absent, you know it is absent. When aversion is present, you know. When the mind is contracted and tight, you know. When it is scattered and restless, you know. When the mind is liberated, you know. When it is not, you know. The starting point is not suppression. It is clear knowing. But clear knowing in the Buddhist sense is not passive noticing. It is mindful, alert, and already leaning toward letting go rather than indulgence. The full formula includes ardor, clear comprehension, and putting aside covetousness and grief. From that clear knowing, the capacity to let go, to guard the mind, and to cultivate wholesome states becomes possible. But then the old problem returns. How can the mind see itself? Does seeing the mind require some kind of observer that stands apart? And if so, have we not simply recreated a soul under a different name? In later Buddhist analysis, especially within the Abhidhamma tradition, there is a precise way to understand this. The mind does not observe itself in the exact same moment. When anger flares up and there is no mindfulness, the experience is fused with anger. There is no gap, no perspective. The person does not see anger is present. They simply react, as if anger is all there is. But in the very next moment, if sati arises, a new mental event appears, accompanied by mindfulness. The previous anger is now known as anger, so it is not that one fixed self is watching from a distance. It is that the stream of experience itself has shifted quality, from blind reactivity to wakefulness. Sati is not a separate observer hovering above the mind. It is a quality that may be present in certain moments and absent in others. This matters because without mindfulness, painful mental states can feel absolute. A thought appears, I am worthless, and in the absence of mindfulness, it is not experienced as a thought. It is experienced as reality, as the final truth about who you are. And because it feels true, you act on it. You withdraw. You punish yourself. You may build years of behavior around a thought pattern that was never as solid as it felt. This grasping, upadana, deepens suffering. The thought itself may be painful, but the deeper suffering comes when the mind seizes it and calls it who you are. There is a world of difference between I am angry and a state of anger is present and being known. In the first, there is fusion, identification, and helplessness. In the second, there is space, and in that space, something becomes possible. You can see this in ordinary life. Two people receive the same harsh criticism. One hears it and immediately becomes the criticism. I am wrong, I am stupid, I have failed. The criticism and the person have merged. But the other person hears the same words and something different happens. The sting is still there. The pain is real. But somewhere in the experience, there is a tiny gap. A moment where the person sees, "This is painful," rather than, "I am a failure." That gap is not merely a technique. It is what begins to open when sati is present. It is the difference between being dragged and being able to stand. The Dhammapada, in verse 35, says the mind is hard to hold, light, landing wherever it wishes, and blessed is the taming of it, for a tamed mind brings happiness. Taming here does not mean breaking. It begins with seeing clearly, then continues with not feeding what is destructive, protecting what is wholesome, and cultivating the conditions in which another quality of mind can appear. Pain has physical causes. Loss arrives from the world outside. Harm comes from other people. The Buddha never denied any of this, but the bondage he was most concerned with, craving, clinging, identification, and deep blindness, takes shape in the mind. So the paradox is this: the mind that gives rise to craving can also learn release. The mind that burns with hatred can be trained toward compassion. There is no path around experience. The path runs through it. Many of the fears you have carried, many of the resentments, many of the restless nights and moments of shame, they all took shape in the mind, and none of them were ever as solid or as permanent as they felt. Each state arose because of conditions. Each state will pass when conditions shift. The shame that felt like your identity was a conditioned state, not a final truth. And the same stream of mind in which fear, shame, and resentment appeared has also known genuine kindness. Every flash of understanding, every time patience appeared where anger could have taken over. That too was the mind, the same stream, under different conditions, with different qualities present. This is one of the central directions of the Buddha's teaching. You cannot see the mind as an object. You cannot hold it, but you can transform it. A mind thick with ignorance, heavy with craving, tangled in identification with every passing state, that mind can become a mind of wisdom and clarity. The conditions for this transformation are not mysterious. They are the practices the Buddha laid out: ethical conduct, mindfulness, concentration, and the understanding that grows from sustained, honest attention to how things actually are. When the mind does not see itself clearly, it creates bondage. It clings to what is passing and calls it permanent. It identifies with what has no fixed self and calls it me. It reacts to what it does not understand and calls its reaction truth. But when seeing, restraint, and understanding are cultivated through sustained practice, freedom becomes possible within that very stream of experience. You cannot find the mind as a fixed object, not behind the eyes, not inside the skull, not anywhere you can point to and say, "There, that is it." Perhaps the mistake was expecting the mind to be the kind of thing that could be pinned down. If the mind were fixed, solid, permanent, unchangeable, then your anger would be permanent. Your confusion would be final. Your suffering would have no exit. But the mind is not fixed. It is more like a living stream of experience, hearing, understanding, feeling, intending, arising through conditions, present for a moment, and passing away. You cannot hold it. You cannot pin it down. And yet it is the most intimate thing in your life. The prison and the key are made of the same thing. Dhammapada, verse 36. The mind is hard to see, very subtle, alighting wherever it wishes. Let the wise one guard the mind. A guarded mind brings happiness. You cannot find the mind as a thing, but you can guard it. You can train it. You can learn to be present as it moves, instead of being moved without knowing. And for the Buddha, that is where freedom begins, not in a final answer to the question, but in the patient honesty of looking again and again,